I'm going to start the webinar. Good afternoon, everybody. As people are logging in, welcome to our webinar. We will get started shortly. Just let everybody get in. We'll start at exactly about 12:03 or 4. Appreciate your joining us today. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. We will get started in about 2 or 3 minutes to let everyone sign in for this excellent webinar on EU guidelines on data centers. Getting started shortly. It's 12:02. We'll get started in a minute. I just want to welcome everybody for joining us today for our webinar. We will be recording this and putting it on our website, novaregion.org. And the presentation will be emailed out to folks who signed up for the webinar. So give it one more minute and we'll go from there. Great to see some of our local government friends on the webinar today. Turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Dale Medeiros, and then to the panelists.
Great, thanks, Bob. My name is Dale Medeiros. I have the privilege of working with Bob here at the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, the NVRC. And thanks for joining our webinar today about the ways in which the work of the European Union to develop metrics for sustainable operations of data centers could form equivalent work here in Northern Virginia. We're thankful that Peter Radgen from the University of Stuttgart joined us. We're also very thankful that our friends from George Mason University are also co-hosts of this webinar. Our work with the two academic institutions in the partnership with the Regional Council of Governments in Stuttgart is unique, but relevant for this in that it symbolizes the ways in which these kinds of conversations can lead to the transfer and adoption of lessons that will help us promote sustainable communities. And in this particular context, sharing technical, economic, social information data that local governments sometimes just don't have access to, but through these applied partnerships or applied research partnerships can help facilitate. The topic of data centers in Northern Virginia is really relevant. The Northern Virginia region hosts the largest concentration of data centers in the world. There's approximately 250 data centers operating in the region, more planned for the next decade. It's currently estimated that the peak energy usage in 2022 for data centers was something approximating 2.8 gigawatts. Some studies suggest it's more. Moreover, the power capacity used by data centers in Northern Virginia doubled between 2018 and 2022. Recently, Dominion Energy forecasts that data centers will require approximately 13.3 gigawatts of power by 2038. PGM projects that the state's peak electricity demand will double by 2038. And these energy trends are likely to increase with the applications of artificial intelligence. But before I go any further, I'd like to introduce my colleague and our partner, George Mason University, in this particular webinar and work on data centers, Jeff Moran. Jeff.
Thanks, Dale. So, hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Moran, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering here at George Mason. My technical background is in thermal fluids engineering, and one of our active projects focuses on enhancing the energy efficiency of data center cooling systems. As many of you know, data centers consume enormous amounts of electrical energy, and a non-trivial percentage of that energy specifically goes into the cooling system. By one estimate, data centers, including their cooling systems, account for between, I believe, 1 and 1.5% of global CO2 emissions. And this is roughly equivalent to the entire airline industry. And so this is a huge problem that is going to grow in size, as Dale mentioned, with the advent of artificial intelligence. Many of you may also know that the average ChatGPT request, when you account for the energy required to train the models, consumes about 10 times as much electricity to fulfill as an average Google search, right? So this is something that where we feel that we can bring our skills in thermal fluids engineering to hopefully make an impact by reducing CO2 emissions associated with data center cooling. We do this by taking fuller advantage of cold surrounding air, which is quite plentiful in our part of the United States these days, as well as natural convection, right? So trying to use nature to improve the efficiency and to cut down on the need for energy-hungry HVAC equipment and things like that. As Dale mentioned, we are the data center capital of the world. And so I'm really excited to be part of this growing ecosystem in Northern Virginia that includes not only Mason, but also partnerships with NVRC, local governments. We also have Northern Virginia Community College, which offers opportunities for students to launch fulfilling careers in the data center operations industry. And they have the first and actually the only, to my knowledge, fully accredited 2-year program of its kind in Virginia. This includes things like an associate's degree in engineering technology with a specialization in data center operations, or data center operations career studies certificate. So there are lots of opportunities, and there's a lot of enthusiasm around responsible and sustainable operations of data centers around Northern Virginia. And that includes Mason in particular, but as you can see, it's really a combined effort between government, industry, and academia. And finally, I'm really excited to be here today to continue to solidify our connections with Stuttgart. So I'm really looking forward to this seminar. I think that's it from my end.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. So to put a little bit more context into the buildup for Peter's presentation, across the Atlantic last year, the European Union adopted new regulations to rate the sustainable operations of data centers for member countries. And in general, they require data center operators to measure the actual energy use within the facility and the differences between the computing and overall performance of the facility's operations, analyze the contributions to reductions of greenhouse gases by specific renewable energy technologies at the facilities, show how much of their energy emanates from renewable energy, describe how they use or reuse waste heat that is produced, and among other things, measure the effectiveness of cooling. So many data center operators in EU countries such as Germany also operate data centers in Northern Virginia, often with similar attributes. In addition, EU countries such as Germany and in cities such as Frankfurt and Berlin, the planning, design, and operations of data centers now must comply with energy and environmental policies associated with these data standards. And this has resulted in, among other things, data centers in places like Frankfurt that convey residual heat through district energy infrastructures, or the construction of multi-story building envelopes that host the data centers, often within the city centers themselves. So here to share his work with us about these latest developments in the EU is Dr. Peter Radgen, the director of the Institute of Energy Economics at the University of Stuttgart and board member of the German Data Center Association. And Peter will speak and share with us his experiences with these new regulations and their effects. A little bit about Peter. Peter's the director of the Graduate and Research School for Energy Efficiency at Stuttgart. After studying mechanical engineering at the University of Karlsruhe and at INSA in Lyon, France, Peter completed his PhD in energy optimization of industrial processes at the University of Duisburg. Between 1995 and 2008, he was the director of energy efficiency section of the Fraunhofer Institute in Karlsruhe. From 2008 to 2015, Peter worked for the energy provider E.ON, it's a utility, where he was responsible for research into energy stores. And from 2010, he's had full responsibility for the research program of CO2 deposits and storage. After working for the Federal Office of Energy in 2016, Peter was appointed Professor of Energy Efficiency at the Institute of Energy Economics and Rational Use of Energy at the University of Stuttgart, his current host. Peter's the author of several national and international publications on the subject of energy efficiency. And Peter is also a board member of the German Data Center Association and the head of the jury for the German Data Center Association Sponsorship Award. Just a little bit of housekeeping after Peter is finished with his talk. We invite questions from you, the audience, the participants, to be entered into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them chronologically. We hope to finish by 1 p.m. And with that, Peter, the floor is now yours. And you're muted.
Yeah, so you should see now the slides, I hope.
Yes.
Should be fine. So, okay, thank you very much, Dale, for the very nice introduction. Welcome to everybody in this webinar today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you some information about the regulation on data centers in Germany and in the European Union. And it was already mentioned by Dale, we have a number of challenges in the data center industry. I will touch a little bit on these issues as these are related to the regulation. So data centers are growing very fast, which was also mentioned by Jeff. And together with this kind of significant growth, environmental challenges, for sure, policymakers come up with new regulations, and we will have within this webinar, we will have a look inside the challenges and developments in the European Union. So I can just flip over the chart about myself. Dale introduced me perfectly. So if you're looking on the worldwide CO2 emissions, we see that since the last 20, 30 years, the CO2 emissions per capita has significantly improved. So especially in the developed world, but also in countries such as China, we see a significant increase. And on the right chart, you see that despite a lot of challenges, the world is in some way on track to reduce its CO2 emissions, to fight against climate change. We are using more and more renewable energies to reduce the carbon footprint of our activities, which is good. And I believe we need to continue on this track. And also these countries which are not on track yet should reach the targets which we have set in the Paris Agreement. We all know that the US has decided now to step out of the Paris Agreement again. But what when we look on the chart, we see that even the last time when the US stepped out of the climate change agreement, however, CO2 emissions went down due to the growth of renewable energies in the US. And therefore, I'm optimistic that this will continue. However, we need to reduce CO2 emissions in all sectors of industry. And if we're looking on which sectors are growing very fast, and you can find hundreds of studies, market studies on how the power consumption of the data center industry will develop in the future. Also, we at our institute, we did some expectations, forecasts, projections on data center energy consumption. And you have two categories of forecasts you can make. You can look on the share of electricity consumption on the total electricity consumption by data centers, and you can look on the total consumption in terawatt hours by data centers. And if you look on the different projections and forecasts, what you can see is there is a tremendous growth, both in absolute terms and in relative terms. And what is clear is that data centers and data center electricity consumption becomes a more and more important aspect of the energy system, as they are taking up a significant share of the electricity consumption. And due to the increase in size of consumption, also we need to increase and build up generation capacities in the best way, renewable generation capacity. On the other hand, what you see, there is a lot of uncertainty, and this has to do with the fact that there is very little information available about the energy consumption of data centers. There is no publicly available data on it. So it's mainly based on estimates on forecasts. It's sometimes based on sales numbers of servers. It's sometimes based on building energy consumption and things like that. So there is a large uncertainty, not only in the forecast, but also in the consumption of electricity consumption of data centers in the past. So nobody knows even what has been the electricity consumption in the past. And for sure, due to this kind of situation, energy efficiency is given a high priority in the recent political developments in the EU, and we will see how the focus and the push for energy efficiency and decarbonization of the energy system is driven in the European Union and the member states. So if you're looking back some time and looking back on the 2020 targets, so the European Commission has set out three aspects of targets, and you might have heard about the 2020 targets. So the European Union has planned to have until 2020 a 20% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990, increasing the share of renewable energies to 20%, and increasing the energy efficiency by 20%. Later on, everybody was seeing, okay, climate change issues getting more serious. They even sharpened the targets and said, okay, 2020, that's fine. We have passed 2020. Now we have to look for 2030. So they defined increased targets for 2030. So they doubled the target for the CO2 reduction, greenhouse gas reduction to -40%, increasing the share of renewables by 32%, and also increasing the energy efficiency by 32%. So, this kind of targets are again outdated by the latest and recent targets of the Commission, which is called Green Deal. And the Green Deal is the aim of the European Union increasing further the ambitions to be compliant also with the Paris Agreement. And therefore, the European Union countries have decided that they will work on legislation to achieve climate neutrality, to increase the circular economy, pushing clean industries, ensuring that we get a healthier environment, looking also on more sustainable farming, and also issues like climate justice and fairness. And if you set out this kind of Green Deal, which is the political planning, the will, you need to develop an idea. Okay, if this is my target, how can I achieve these targets? And this is made by a legislation package which is called Fit for 55. So 55, why it's called Fit for 55? Well, it's called Fit for 55 as we have the target to reduce the EU greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. And if I'm flipping back, what do you see? The original reduction target was much lower. It was -40% by 2030. Now it was increased to -55% by 2030. And therefore, the Fit for 55 package set proposals to revise and update EU legislation just to achieve these new targets. And therefore, there is legislation that has to be implemented. If you're looking on, is the European Union on track with its ambitious targets? And you see on the left-hand side, the dots you see here, these are the target lines where we want to go by 2030, 40% still in. Not the increased target yet in the chart. And you see the lines, what we have already achieved, and what you can see, well, it looks like that we are on track, but we need to increase a little bit the ambitions. And on the right side, you see a little bit the achievements in the different categories, depending, broken down by the member states. And if it's all green, the country as a member state, the European Union member state, is on track. If it's yellow, it's not on track. And you see countries like Portugal, for example, Finland or Estonia are fully on track. Germany, nearly on track, but still some issues with final energy consumption to be solved. So we need to increase our efficiency further to achieve the targets. When we are talking about data centers, we need to keep in mind that we have different types of data centers. The more general classification of data centers is between hyperscalers and co-location, managed service data centers and enterprise data centers, and the edge data centers. And the different types of data centers are serving different markets, I would say. And therefore, it's important to see what is the recent developments and what is the sizes. And you can see that the sizes of data centers, especially hyperscaler and co-location, are significantly increasing in size. We are talking about capacities 50 megawatt and plus, whereas the other types of data centers are typically much smaller, and especially edge data centers are more small-scale data centers. And if you're looking on recent market developments, we see a very strong growth of hyperscalers and co-location. We see an increase in managed service data centers and an increase in edge data centers. So we see that digitalization of our societies is driving the need for data centers significantly upwards. And that is what you see all where that there is announcement for new large-scale data centers being built in all regions of the world. If we're looking on estimated data center energy consumption in Europe, and there was a study made by the European Commission Joint Research Center, we see the different member states of the European Union together with the data center electricity use, that's the bars, and the share of national electricity use, it's the yellow dots. And if you're looking on Europe, the country with the largest data center fleet, I would say, is Germany so far, with an energy consumption of about, say, between 12 and 18 terawatt hours of electricity consumption per year. You see that the gray arrow bars are quite large, so there is a lot of uncertainty. Next to Germany, it's France and Netherlands, especially with Paris and Amsterdam. Ireland is also significant, related to its size, has a significant capacity and has the highest share of electricity use for data centers. It's very close to 20% of Ireland's electricity consumption is determined by data center electricity use, which causes a number of problems for them due to the availability of electricity. London is also an important place in Europe where data centers are being built. But as you all know, UK has left the European Union, and therefore it's not accounted in this European map anymore, but it's also a significant use. It's close by Germany or even above. There is also some debate if London and UK is larger than Germany and Frankfurt. Nobody knows exactly. And if you're looking on the right chart, you see the consumption estimates from McKinsey. Also, what you see is there is a significant growth, and they expect the share of electricity consumption from data centers to go up from 2.2% to 4.5%. So let us have a look on the Fit for 55 package with the part on energy efficiency. And we have the targets reducing the final energy consumption at EU level in 2030. And this is written in paragraph 4 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. We established for the first time in Europe the energy efficiency first principle, which is quite a political change. in the past, policies typically were looking on how I can supply energy. And now this is second. The first is energy efficiency, which is set out in paragraph 3 of the efficiency directive. And the directive also focus on the implementation of energy management systems. Energy management systems have the aim to ensure that companies take issues around energy and energy consumption serious and monitor their energy consumption. This directive, which is part of the Fit for 55 package, went into force in September 2023, when it was published in the EU's official journal. And based on the system of the European legislation, if the European Commission and the European Union implements a European directive, what is written there in the directive has to transpose into the national laws by the member states within 2 years. So there is some delay between the EU directive entering into force and the implementation in the member states. And in the energy efficiency directive, it was the first time also that it was introducing an obligation for the monitoring and reporting of the energy performance of data centers. So despite the fact that data centers are not a sector in the traditional way like steel and chemicals, but they are accounted for normally under the buildings or tertiary sector energy consumption, now this energy efficiency directive targets specifically data centers and requiring them to monitor and report the energy performance. And to ensure that you get a better insight into this consumption figures and that you can monitor, it defines that a European database will be set up which collects the data and publishes the data on energy performance and water footprint. And this is quite important when this data comes available, that for the first time, you are getting clear information about the energy situation and the water consumption situation of data centers. So for the first time, the European Union is legally addressing directly the data centers and with the aim of promoting sustainability in the sector. For sure, as you all are aware, I think there is further important legislation in the European Union on the digital industry. I just highlight 3 ones, one is the cybersecurity, which becomes a more and more important topic. We have the issues around artificial intelligence, so having harmonized rules for artificial intelligence, what you can do with it, how you should apply it, which security measures you have to take. And we have what is called the General Data Protection Regulation, which protects your data, which is also an important aspect in Germany and is also important in relation between data center operation and data center operators and companies, IT companies, where data can be stored compliant with German laws or European laws. Now, let us look on the EU principle, how we trickle down EU legislation in Europe. So before we had a formal legislation on the energy efficiency on data centers, we started with some voluntary approaches. So there was a European Code of Conduct for energy efficiency in data centers developed as a first step. So it's a voluntary approach. It was given some information what data centers can do and should do to improve their energy efficiency. And this information and this approach has built the basis for the energy efficiency directive and these regulations for data centers. A directive is typically amended by some commission delegated regulation, which is a law which or a rule which is supporting the directive by explaining terms or setting additional points which have been not regulated in the directive. And to clarify this open question, also there has been a study, a package of studies which were ordered by the European Commission to prepare this kind of delegated regulation on data centers. So looking on options for reporting schemes, thinking about labeling and minimum performance standards, and also trying to set some ideas for a repository for the reporting obligations. This kind of European database is currently under implementation by the European Commission. The first reporting deadline was 15 September 2024. So last September, all data centers in the European Union had to report their data to the European Commission. As mentioned, the European directives have to be implemented into national law in the different member states. And I will highlight you a little bit what happened in Germany, as Germany was the first member state which has to transpose the majority of regulations of the energy efficiency directive into national law. And this law in Germany is called the Energy Efficiency Act, or which was entered into force November 2023. And if you look on the date, you see it's just 2 months after the EU regulation had been finished, the German implementation was executed. So it was quite fast. We have 2 years time, but we finished it in 2 months, as it was prepared in parallel to the work on the energy efficiency directive. And what is paragraph 12 in the energy efficiency directive is split up in the German regulation into paragraphs 11 to 16 and or even 17, whereas 11 to 16 addressing direct data center directly, and 16 and 17 addressing the waste heat issue. So it's not focusing there on data centers alone, but it's addressing also waste heat from other sectors of industry. So waste heat from, for example, cement plants, steel plant, chemical plants. So it's more general, and therefore it's separated from the core regulations of the data centers, as it's waste heat is addressed for all sectors of industry. So let us dive into the requirements for data centers. If we are looking on the European regulation, paragraph 12 of the EED, there is a number of regulations, and the first says that data centers need to make information on location, energy consumption, and other data publicly available. And for sure, there are some exclusions possible for trade secrets, data centers for defense and civil protection, but this is a minor share of the data centers. It sets up the regulations and the rules for the establishment of the European database, and it encourages data center operators to take into account best practices. And as you can see, it links again back to the European Code of Conduct for Data Center Energy Efficiency, which was also driving the energy efficiency directive for data centers there. And there is some follow-up also, that by May 2025, the Commission shall assess the availability of data center energy efficiency data, and if it is useful, require further measures, and maybe including the establishment of minimum performance standards and an assessment of the feasibility of the transition towards a net zero emission data center sector. So on a European level, the European EED directive just said that you have to supply information, but nothing more. We will see that in Germany, we are much stricter with the implementation. So we do not require information, but we are requiring also clear action for improving sustainability of data centers. There are, however, if you're going to implement such laws, always some risks and some chances. And for sure, the key chance for improving energy efficiency in data centers is that you're reducing the cost, you're stimulating innovation, you can have and develop new offers for customers, and it's strengthening also this kind of transparency, strengthening the sustainability competition. What is the risk? As it is clear as well that cost increases due to legal requirements may harm competitiveness, and we might see migration of data centers abroad outside the EU. We might see stranded investments, or we see even a setback for digitalization as a driver of energy efficiency in all sectors. And this has to be well balanced. So this is always the requirement for the legislator to balance chances and risks so that it can work perfectly. So looking on the energy efficiency law and what it covers. The energy efficiency law is to be accepted by all data centers which have a non-redundant power supply capacity above 300 kilowatt. So it's not so large. It always cover smaller data centers, not the completely small ones, but the mid-size, the small data centers. And there are also some similar requirements in regards to the IT operators. That was included in the first draft of the law. It addressed not only the data center operators, but it addressed also the IT operators. But finally, in the final version of the law, this has been wiped out. So it remained only the requirements for the data center operators. If we are comparing also which data centers are included on a European level, the European Union sets a level that all data centers with an IT power larger than 500 kilowatt are included, which means in Germany, more data centers fall under the legislation than on a European level. What are the topics the paragraphs of the directive of the German Energy Efficiency Act deal with? It deals with climate neutral data centers. It deals with energy and environmental management systems, the information obligations, the energy efficiency register. It deals with information and advice in the customer relationship. And then we have 16 and 17 dealing with the avoidance and utilization and waste heat and the platform for waste heat, which collects in a quite similar way data on waste heat from companies. So the most important part, most likely, is paragraph 11, the climate neutral data centers. And we have seen on the European level, there is no requirements to achieve a certain energy efficiency standard. It just says you have to report and you should improve your efficiency, but it does not require certain efficiency values. On a German level, we have clear targets for data centers. Existing data centers, so data centers which went into operation before July 2026, have to achieve a power efficiency of 1.5, equal or below 1.5 by July 2027, and equal or below 1.3 by July 2030. So also existing data centers have to improve their energy efficiency, and especially the 1.3 by July 2030 for older data centers might be challenging. New data centers, for sure, if you can build from scratch, it is clear that you can build much more easy for higher energy efficiency. So new data centers which went into going to be in operation starting July 2026 have to achieve a power usage effectiveness of 1.2 or below. And this means this is quite a target. It can be achieved. There are a number of data centers which achieving this PoE below 1.2, but it's not, very often you cannot build as you have done in the past. In addition to the power usage effectiveness, the German law also look on waste heat, and it requires data centers, new data centers, to make use of the waste heat which is produced in the data center. And it also has a staged requirement. So from July 2026, data centers, new data centers have to have an energy reuse factor of 10%. So 10% of the waste heat has to be used. It's increasing in July 2027. It has to be 15%, and data centers starting operation from 2027, July 2028, sorry, there's a typo, should be above or equal 20%. For sure, there are some extensions from waste heat use requirements in relation to the availability of heat off-takers, but this will be challenging to prove that there is no heat off-takers. The PoE, the power usage effectiveness and energy reuse factors, are using the definition of the European standard EN 15600, and should be achieved at least 2 years after the start of operation of the data center, and are calculated on an annual basis. So it's not important what you have in winter or summer, it's just the average value over a year. If you're looking on current PoE values, and I'm using here numbers from the International Energy Agency, which looked on worldwide energy consumption. And if you see the distribution between network, storage, infrastructure, and servers, how it is increasing, and then you can calculate the PoE. In 2014, it was somewhere around 1.85. It increased to 2020 to 1.56. And if you compare it with the target for new data centers of 1.2, it is obvious that you need to improve significantly also the existing data centers to achieve the PoE targets. If you're looking on the waste heat, and I did some calculation for the waste heat utilization of a small data center, so a 1 megawatt data center. And if you want to achieve the energy reuse factor, you see here the energy reuse factor, which is quite high. The energy reuse factor, if you want to maximize the use of waste heat, then you see the energy reuse factor going down with the increased share of waste heat. Why is this a fact? If you're increasing and if you want to cover the heat demand of buildings 100% by a data center waste heat, then it is clear that most of the time the full capacity will not be used, and therefore the energy reuse factor is limited, typically somewhere around 50%. This makes it very difficult, therefore, to achieve this kind of 20% targets which is set out. And this will be one of the biggest challenges for the European data centers or the data centers in Germany to cope with these requirements for making use of the waste heat from the data centers. If we're further looking on the climate neutral data centers, then it is clear that you should use electricity from renewable energies. And there is a clear target. Since January 24, data centers have to cover at least 50% of their electricity consumption by renewable electricity. And by January 27, so not far out, they have to cover it to 100%. It's not physical physical fulfillment, but you can do it with certificates or PPA. But you have to replace and use only renewable electricity in your data centers, and to prove it against the legislator. And in addition, that is a typo again. I have to correct it with the paragraph. There is a paragraph on data center operators and IT operators which have to implement an energy management or environmental management system for their data center operation. And here it is important to see that the Energy Efficiency Act, even if the majority of issues and requirements is looking on only the data center operators, but it addresses here the energy management, addresses also the IT operators. So if you have an IT operation, if you're in a co-location facility and you're operating in an IT capacity above 300 kilowatt, then you have to implement also an energy management system as IT operator. And for sure to improve continuously the energy efficiency of your data centers. The information requirements are quite broad. So data centers have to publish each year by March 31st information on the efficiency of data centers. And there is, in the German law, there is a list of data points to be published in Annex 3, and it includes points such as name of the data center, operator and owner, the power capacity, but also it includes the total energy consumption, the temperature and amount of waste heat, and also the energy efficiency indicators like the power usage effectiveness, the energy reuse factor, the cooling efficiency ratio, and the water usage effectiveness, all according to the European standard EN 5600. And there is a publication requirement. So you have to make this information publicly available. And the German government offer a way to publish these values in an easy way via the German data center register. You can only set a tick and then you have fulfilled your obligation of publication, but you can do it also yourself. You can pin your information and make your information public also by different means. The data center register for energy efficiency for sure enables the collection of information from data centers in Germany in a national register. We have learned that the Energy Efficiency Directive on a European level, there will be a European database collecting the information from data centers across Europe. And smaller countries can make use of this database that, for example, data centers for Malta can report directly into the European database. In Germany, we have chosen a different way, as we see this as an important aspect. So the German government has set up its own register for data centers. So they have to report to the German government, the data centers, and the data are then sent by the government to the European register. So there is no double accounting. It's just collected in Germany by the national government. And data center operators have to inform also their customers about their energy consumption directly and also as their share of the infrastructure electricity consumption. This is important as in the co-location business, we very often see that you are not being billed for electricity individually, but you are being billed with a fixed price for your rack or your cage, rather than on your energy consumption. And at least you have now the requirement that you are reporting as data center operator to your customers their electricity consumption in your data center. So To conclude a little bit, what is the state of play for data centers? We see significant growth. It's the fastest growing business, not only in Europe. We see that environmental impacts of data centers are growing and therefore also driving data center regulation. Electricity consumption and grid capacity requirements, and I think that's in Virginia the same as in Germany and all over Europe. Due to this exploding requirements of consumption, it becomes a bottleneck for further growth of the industry. European and national regulation will enable now with the data collection to get a better understanding of the industry, and therefore hopefully there will be a regulation which enables a sustainable growth of the data center industry, with some challenges. For sure, waste heat requirements and minimum POE values will be challenging in some cases. And if you're looking on the data, as all the data have to be made publicly available, so far there is no release of official data, neither on a German nor European level. But first insights show already that not all data center operators have been compliant with submitting data to the registers at national or European institutions. And they should just keep in mind that there are fines up to 100,000 euros per case for non-compliant operators. So it can become very expensive not to comply to the laws. And with this, I would like to thank you for your interest, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. That was fascinating. Neely Law asks earlier on in your slide decks, how is significant energy consumption defined?
Well, it is not defined. The significant energy consumption. Which slide was it? Just to be sure. Do you know it? Which slide it was? Was it in the?
I'll allow Neely to, if I can find him to talk.
Okay. So in principle, if a data center falls under the regulation, depends on the non-redundant power supply, which is 300 kilowatt. And if you multiply it with 8,000 hours of operation, you can get a grip on what is the energy consumption, which is relevant for the legislation.
Right. Renee Griebe asks, what qualifies in the definition of, quote, renewable, end quote, energy? It's definitely a topic that is more flexible than many of us prefer here in the United States. So what are the defining attributes of renewable energy in this context?
There is a special EU regulation, what is agreed as renewables. We had a strong debate on what is renewable energy. Some people were trying to declare nuclear energy as renewable energy, but it's not included. It's similar with what we have as discussion for green hydrogen. So it's mainly you have to prove that the energy is coming from solar, wind, and hydro mainly. It can be also geothermal, but that's the main sources. And it can be either delivered or you can have it as a certificate. So it's a balance issue that producers of electricity, of green electricity, get a certificate, and a kilowatt hour of electricity and the certificate for the green electricity is traded separately. So someone can buy the electricity and someone can buy the certificate, independent where it is used physically.
Great. Emma Fryer asks, collating energy at the nation state or the EU level on energy data at those levels will be very valuable, but given the challenging nature of some of the requirements, issues raised regarding the implementation process and reporting requirements, what do you think are the most important lessons learned from EED that should be shared with other regulators?
Well, I think the most important one is that the policy regulators very often do not trust on scientists or people having an understanding what happens. So what we see is we have a number of data points taken up in the regulation, which data center operators cannot provide. So this data is not available. And if you ask legally that it has to be provided and they cannot provide it, that's a little bit difficult. And therefore, I think the most important aspect which is important is that if you're going to implement such legislation, you have to have an intensive dialogue with the industry and trying to have a reasonable discussion about the issues. And this requires also some openness of the industry to share at least some data, as very often it is not clear. There is a general no, we are not going to do it, we are not sharing it, it doesn't make sense. But instead, what we need is a more constructive process in setting up laws, as I think both sides can take advantage of it, and I have shown it with the challenges and risks. So there is also some advantages to implement such regulations.
Thank you. Alison Greenday asks, how much of the technology needed to meet these requirements, especially PUE, ERF, currently exists? And how much is scalable? And how much is yet to be developed?
Well, I would say all the technologies are available at scale. So you can just apply it. It might increase a little bit the cost, but it's possible. A challenge might be, or it might ease it even, we are seeing currently a transition from the classical air-cooled data center with the water-cooled data center. So we have the cooling on chip with the higher power densities related to AI applications. We are seeing more and more water cooling on chip. And if we're going to go water cooling, we have higher waste temperatures, and then cooling efforts are much lower, as we can just reject it with the heat with free cooling instead of using a refrigeration cycle. So I would say it's possible with today's technology. It might at some point in time require some additional capital investment. And the biggest challenge in achieving this kind of PUE values is that if you have a data center which is only running only at half the capacity it has, so if you have 50% of your space not rented out, then it can be challenging, as you have still the full infrastructure which operating at strong part load, and then it's not efficient. Then you might get in trouble with achieving the values. Even from a design point, from a design PUE, you might achieve it, but in operation you don't achieve it. And what is relevant for the law is the achievement of the PUE in operation and not as the design PUE.
Great, thanks. Steve Walsh asks, on your last slide, you indicated that no official data or little has been released. When do you expect information from data center reporting to be publicly available from the data center reports? What types of information, such as data points, are to be expected to be provided if they can be generalized?
Yeah. On a European level, I assume that it will be available somewhere in late 2025. And for Germany, I would assume that it might come in the first half of 2025. But it's very open. Nobody knows exactly. There is a pressure on the government to publish the data. And the problem will be that the quality of the data will be very poor. So from my knowledge from the German register, the number of data centers which have not submitted data is quite significant. And therefore, even if the data would be public, you should be very careful by using it, as they are incomplete.
Great. An anonymous attendee asks, is it possible to translate annual terawatt hours to instantaneous gigawatt demand? And asks, maybe dividing terawatt hours by 365, then 24?
Yes, you can nearly, well, I wouldn't say 8,760 hours. So it's, but normally data centers run 24/7 for sure. And therefore you can, I would say if you calculate with 50%, 50% capacity load, so you can transform it in a capacity if you divide it by something like 4,000 hours.
That's great. So Judd Cargar asks, what are the biggest challenges data centers face in consistently achieving low PUE targets across diverse climates?
Well, for sure, it's easier in cold climates to achieve low PUEs. So if you're going in Europe, if you're going to Scandinavia, it's a little bit colder. So then it's easier. You have lower consumption for refrigeration and cooling. For hot climates, it's getting a little bit more expensive. But I would assume, yes, it is an issue, but the difference is not so large. It depends a little bit more on technology, and I already mentioned it, that if you're moving from air-cooled data centers to liquid-cooled data centers on chip, then it's getting much easier, and to achieve the PUE will be possible. But it's right, as it's a Europe, if you would scale it on a European level, you would need to take this into consideration, that in Spain you might have more difficulties achieving low PUEs than in Sweden or Norway. For Germany, within Germany, for sure, there is differences between north and south, but they set a single value for all over Germany, and I think that's fine. That's feasible.
That's great. Craig Carlson asks, is there any consideration being given to actually attempting to limit the growth of AI applications in order to slow down the energy and resource consumption? Many people question the value that AI brings to most people's daily lives. It feels more like tech companies have created a new product and are trying to sell it to be of more value than it really offers.
Well, I would say as long as there is someone who's willing to invest in new data center capacity, it will be used. I think the limitation will come not from the application. Now it's, I would say it's a race to get the market share. So large companies are trying to secure their place on the market. It's not, as I'd say, they make money at the moment with the data centers, but it's to make their place and to survive, and then being able to make the money afterwards. But the limitation is the availability of electricity, which will limit the growth at the moment. And that's similar also to at our university. Each additional data center capacity is consumed immediately. And therefore, I do not see any limitation yet, despite that there will be regulations which require improving efficiency, and we see also that chip design and servers are getting more and more efficient. And we need to keep in mind, when we're looking on POE, when we are looking on infrastructure such as cooling, we are addressing the decimal after the one. And what we need to do is also we need to address the one, which is the IT equipment performance. And there is a lot of potential still with idling servers, servers not used in a good way. So there is a lot of improvement potential there as well, which can reduce the consumption of energy significantly.
Right. Michael Reynolds asks, is there a concept of demand pricing in Europe for data centers, particularly where they are charged higher rates at certain times of high needs to encourage them to be efficient or to maintain some control on growth of the utility demand? And we have 2 more questions after that, then we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, well, the larger scale data centers typically buy their electricity on the spot market, and they have some base contracts. So if the price goes up, they are paying higher prices. So they see when demand is high, the prices are high, and that's what is driving also the issue of energy flexibility of data centers. So can you move calculation loads from one data center in a region where you might have overcapacity of electricity, as you have a lot of renewables, and back if the sun is and the wind is not shining, to data centers closer to other generation capacities. So this is an issue. Data centers have to be more flexible in their energy consumption in the future.
Great. Second to last question, an anonymous attendee asks, do IT demand or IT capacity figures generally exclude energy demand for cooling? If so, is there a reasonable rule of thumb to estimate total demand? Seem to
Okay, I think I have lost you. My headset was gone away. Are you hearing me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. So when we are talking about IT demand or IT capacity, this exclude the energy consumption. Oops. Just stopping it, the slide. So this excludes the energy consumption for cooling, but it includes for sure the fan power of the servers. So there is classically, if you say we have a PoE of 1.5, this means that the majority of about 80–90% is used by the IT, and the remaining 10–20% is used by the cooling equipment and lighting and other applications.
Fantastic. Last question, with immersion cooling achieving PoE as low as 1.05 and rack densities reaching 300 kilowatts, do you think a PoE target of 1.5 might not be only challenging, but also insufficient to collectively effectively cool such high density racks? How should the industry address this gap?
I think even with high density racks, you can achieve this low PoEs. High density racks just require a different way of cooling. You can no longer use air cooling. You need water cooling, or you need immersion cooling, or whatever. And with this kind of technologies, you can also achieve with high density racks lower PoEs. For sure, if you just forcing much more air through the racks to reduce and get rid of the high density, then it might be difficult. So it needs also some redesign of the systems maybe to achieve this low PoE at high density racks.
Great. Peter, Jeff, I just want to say thanks to everybody. There was a question about whether this recording will be posted. Yes, we will. And for the participants, we will email to you the slide decks, which will be filtered out by Peter after this webinar. Thank you very, very much. Bob, any closing words?
No, I just want to thank Peter and Jeff for joining us. As Dale said, the video will be on our website tomorrow, and we will email out the slides as well. Appreciate everyone joining us. A topic of great interest, not only in Northern Virginia, but around the globe, and glad to be able to share some best practices from our colleagues in Germany and the EU. So appreciate everyone joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.